Hey guys, happy Friday. Welcome to another live stream. I am your host, Mario. I'm going to cover up a couple things on my screen because I get distracted. I'm actually not going to be addressing the chat today. Maybe at the very end, I'll see what's going on. But I find that things with presentations tend to go a little smoothly, a little more smoothly if I'm just paying attention to my slides and everything else. So just a heads up about that. But if you're here, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So, we're going to be talking about the magician's wand today. And so, we're going to get into the nitty gritty with my personal opinion about wand symbolism, what it ultimately means, how it's relevant to the magician card, how it's relevant to magic. And as I was putting this presentation together, I realized that there are so many different angles to talk about here. And that seems just to be kind of the theme with most things these days. I had to resist putting in so many different things into the slides today because it just would have been absolutely massive. And as is right now, I think there's something like 73 slides or something along those lines that we'll be looking at. So, way more than I expected. I'm kind of maxing out the StreamYard limitation with PDFs and stuff. So, we managed to squeeze everything in, but there are a few things here that we could easily expand upon in the future, and I will do that at some point. So um yeah, let's get started here because there is a lot to get to. And I've been wanting to talk about the magician, by the way, and alchemy and Mercury for a little while. Whenever I bring up polar symbolism, northern symbolism, Mercury seems to be something that I always want to continue unpacking. And I think that understanding Mercurial symbolism is a really, really great way to understand Northern polar symbolism as well. And so this is kind of my opportunity just to get a lot of random things off my chest as it relates to Mercury, as it relates to magic and the wand. And yeah, I just found that the wand was maybe the perfect symbol to kind of like dive into with all this stuff. So let me add the presentation here. Right. Okay. So this is like the most famous magician card, right? It's the Rider Waite. It's classic for a lot of different reasons, and I think it's great. I love the Rider Waite. There's so many things going on in this card that we could, as I've been saying, we could just easily expand on it for like multiple episodes. But I'm honing in on a few very specific symbols. So, as you can see, you have a young magician here, and he's making an as above, so below posture in his right hand toward the sky. You see this wand, and before him, you see a table, and you have elements, uh, symbols, objects that are related to the four elements. So, you've got the disc there, symbolic of earth, you've got the cup, symbolic of water, you've got the sword, symbolic of air, and then you've got a wand, right? Symbolic of fire. And so notice that these objects, these symbols, are neatly organized on the magician's table. Okay, this is something that we'll be getting into. And then also notice that there is an infinity sign above the magician's head. But obviously the intention behind this presentation is to get into the wand and what that's all about. And I would say that the wand is definitely connected to the pose itself. This as above, so below posture, which has become really well known, I think, over the last handful of years with occultism and with things like that. People are aware of the mantra, the as above, so below sort of ideology and what that could represent. People talk about it all the time. And it is absolutely a part of everything that I want to talk about today. Also, I think it's worth noting that the Magician card is the first card in the Major Arcana obviously after the Fool, which typically corresponds with the number zero. And so it goes from the Fool, zero, and then it goes to the Magician card, number one. And this number one element is basically, a kind of key to understanding, wand symbolism and even this pose that I'm talking about here. Everything about this card, everything about the magician, everything about the wand itself has to do with the number one. And so here's a different version of the card, an older version, more like the Marseille deck. And you can see that a lot of the traditional elements are here. This name, by the way, I'm not even going to attempt to say it, but it means the bearer of the baton. And so the baton is like what's being acknowledged here. This wand, or what I might also refer to as a staff or a rod. There's lots of different names for it. But you can see here that one of his arms is upward, one of his arms and hands are lower down. And you could see that there are tools or objects on the table here, right? And it's kind of a tradition too to have three legs showing with this table. And that's something that could be discussed at another time, I think. But that's kind of a curious detail. There are a lot of things going on with the older versions of the Magician card that I find to be personally fascinating. And if it's not the next slide, I believe a slide shortly will kind of get into some of those elements. Yes, here it is. And so I'm going to change my settings here so you guys can see this more clearly. So this is another version of an older magician card of a bearer of the baton. And I think it's really fascinating that there are people out there that are saying that it was a tradition back in the day to actually, instead of having a clear baton or a clear wand, that what the magician was holding was actually a symbolic penis. And so, one account, if you guys are interested in this information online, you can check out Torah.tarot on Instagram. And so he gets really into the Torah associations and the esoteric Jewish associations with the tarot. And he has several posts about the magician here. And he makes the case that basically there's a lot of phallic symbolism in this card. And so, he says that the hat itself is a reference to circumcision. And he says that the tools on the table are supposed to be symbolic of ancient Jewish circumcision tools as well. And so I did not include some of that material here, but that is absolutely a rabbit hole I would be willing to go down and discuss with you guys, because I think there's absolutely something to it. And so he is making the case that, way back when, some of the earlier magician cards were overtly symbolic of the phallus and of that quality, and therefore too of rituals associated with the penis, like circumcision. And so this would be a very fascinating slideshow to get into at some point. But I just wanted to throw that out there, that there are people out there that are pretty much saying similar things to what I'm saying, but through a different lens. And so if you want more of that information, check out that Instagram account. And so this is actually a card that I have in my collection. And you could see that even the wand that he's holding here, it's a little bit more phallic than a lot of the other magician cards that I have. So I think you can pretty clearly just make a correspondence between the magician's wand and the penis. And what the penis represents and what the wand represents, there's a lot of overlapping similarities. It brings forth creation, essentially. And like I was saying earlier, it makes sense that the magician, being the number one card, would be associated with this. Just look at the shape, right, of the number one itself. And so this is actually a alternative magician card from the Thoth deck. And so if you buy some versions of the Thoth deck, you will receive, I believe it's 3 magician cards, either 3 total or maybe 3 alternatives. But I pulled out a couple of them just so that I can show you guys some of the phallic symbolism that's associated with this version of the magician card. And so here you can see that the magician is front and center and he is nude and you can see his penis. And then also you can see right down below the ape or monkey. He's also nude, as monkeys tend to be. And you can see his penis right there, too. So Crowley was obviously making this connection, and he's well aware of the symbolic implications of this. And so here you're literally just seeing kind of like 2 nude mercurial figures. And so that is one thing to keep in mind as well, is that the ape or monkey definitely has a correspondence with Mercury or Thoth. And I was just reading that, Hanuman from the Vedic pantheon is kind of a mercurial equivalent. And so it makes sense that the ape would be here on this card, given the fact that the magician corresponds with Mercury. And so here you can see the card in the lower right, you can see the symbol for Mercury. And I have another version of an alternative card here. Once again, you can see the mercurial symbol in the lower left. And you can also see another version of an ape. And so the ape is behind the magician here, right? Um, and you can see the caduceus, down below in between his legs. It's shooting upward. And then the disc at the top of the caduceus is over the genitals of the magician. I think that there is room for interpretation with this disc. I know most people would say that this is actually a solar sun disk. I like to make the case that actually, before it was solar in nature, my understanding is that it's actually a polar symbol. And so this is a reference to polar symbolism. And so this staff is symbolic of the world axis or the cosmic axis. Also notice that the magician here is on his tippy toes. And so this is a very curious element that I will be pointing out throughout the presentation. There is a strong correspondence with Mercury or Hermes or the magician or different expressions of this energy standing on one foot, being on their tippy toes, being on one foot on their tippy toes, like kind of like a ballerina or something. And so to me, the symbolism is really interesting. And once you notice it, you tend to see it when you're doing this kind of research with mercurial magical figures. And so I think that is very interesting. Also notice that there seems to be some sort of relationship between the left arm and the right arm here. It almost looks as though there is a toroidal energy, and that the polarity of the toroid is going from arm to arm. And so to me, that's just what it looks like. It looks like there's some sort of gateway or some sort of connection between the arms. And then obviously, the magician here has like 8 arms or something, right? Um, it's fascinating because when you think of polarity, I tend to think of the pole itself as being vertical, but actually any orientation is correct. So even a horizontal pole still conveys this idea of polarity, of a positive and a negative. And so I think that's what's being expressed here, is the polarity between the 2 halves of self, the left side and the right side. And obviously, there's a lot of symbolism related to the left hand path versus, say, the right hand path. And so this has been acknowledged in this card this particular way. So your body is an expression of polarity from top to bottom, but it's also an expression of polarity from left to right. And so I think that's something that's worth acknowledging here. And then obviously you can see too, at the very bottom, the magician has really exaggerated wings on his feet. So being a mercurial figure or character, he is also a traveler. And this is the common version of the magician card. And I think that this was the right way to go. If you're going to have like a main version of the card. And I love this card for a lot of different reasons. you could see that the wings are really, really exaggerated from his feet. Notice, speaking of which, that his feet, the front foot is making this tippy toe sort of thing that I'm talking about. So it almost looks like he's supposed to be pivoting or twirling on this toe, or at the very least, he's balancing on his toe. This reminds me too, when you look at really old Venus statues, like the really famous Venusian statue, where it's like a really voluptuous big woman up top, and then notice that her legs taper down to a point. And so to me, this is expressing a lot of the same symbolism, which I'll be getting into a little bit later. But notice that also just behind this version of the magician is this pole. And so this pole to me is very much symbolic of the world axis or the cosmic axis. And so it's just right here for you because Mercury has a very strong correspondence with the world axis because the world axis is symbolically the bridge that he uses to go from plane to plane or from realm to realm. So this world axis is symbolic of a bridge, of a post or a ladder, of a world mountain, but essentially it is a way to travel. So it's the middle way, it's the middle path. And so I think that having such an obvious pull behind the magician, I think was a really, really nice touch. And then obviously, as I've been saying, the number one, right? It's just another emphasis of the number one as well. And here you have it, the number one. So this would be Roman numeral one. Notice that it looks very much like a pillar. And so that's what we're dealing with here, guys. The wand, to me, and the pillar or the column or the phallus, it's all pretty much the same thing as far as I'm concerned when it comes down to it. And I guess that is partly where my research is just at. It's going down to the nuts and bolts of things, or as I often say, the pole and the whole of everything of life. So I just wanted to acknowledge that this looks very similar to a column or a pillar, and also it looks similar to an I, as in the letter I. And I'm of the opinion that literally, guys, the letter I corresponds with the world axis. It corresponds with the cosmic axis. So when you type in the letter I or you write the letter I, that's what you're dealing with. And according to some resources, I find this very intriguing, that the lowercase I don't have a slide for this, but the lowercase I is actually symbolic of the world axis, and the dot on top is symbolic of the pole star. Excuse me, the pole star. And so the dot on top is Polaris, and then you have the world axis down below. To me, that makes perfect sense. And so notice obviously that the letter I could also be interpreted as like an I, as in me, as in my personal identity, as in my perspective, right? And so that very much plays into mercurial symbolism and symbolism related to the magician. It's about your power. It's about your perspective, and it's about what you are capable of doing. You know, and so I think it's very curious too that the letter I also sounds exactly like I, as in EYE, as in your third eye. Um, and I'm just of the opinion now, these days, that when we're talking about our third eye, we are talking about another polar symbol, another polar northern symbol, that has a direct correspondence with the North Star, in my opinion. And I'll show you why. This presentation is going to get into this. Um, but your third eye, I think, also too, maybe it's your first eye. Maybe it's not the third eye, but maybe it's the first eye. And so I think that this concept is worth kind of unpacking. But that's something that I've kind of come to the conclusion of recently, is that it actually might be best said as our third eye being the first eye. The third eye is the middle path. It's the middle way. It's the you know, it's the representation of going through two other polarities or going through or combining duality, in my opinion. And so we'll get into some Freemasonic artwork that kind of shows this a bit later. But then I think you guys will kind of see what I'm talking about. And so here it is, the all-seeing eye. All you have to do is add a triangle, and the number 3 is associated with Hermes in so many different ways, guys. It's really, really interesting, which we're not even going to get into that much. But the thrice great Hermes Trismegistus, he's associated with the number 3, and the number 3 is very much related to the wand, because I would say arguably the wand is the middle path or middle way. When you're talking about three pillars, as we'll see, the wand represents the central pillar, the original pillar, which I think is the world axis. Well, this reminds you of Freemasonic symbolism. I know it does for me, at least. And so it's said, this is common knowledge, but that the compass up top is symbolic of heaven. And so you use the compass to create circles. You use the compass to determine angles. And then it's said that the ruler down below is symbolic of Earth. And so the compass in the square, the compass representing the heavens, and the square representing Earth, the four corners of Earth, etc. To me, it makes a lot of sense that this would be the case. The number 4 corresponds with the Earth in so many different ways. It really, really corresponds with foundations and things like that. And so it's no surprise, obviously, that in Freemasonry, they would use all of this symbolism. But in my opinion, this all goes back to Northern polar symbolism. And if me saying that, if this is like new information, me saying Northern or polar stuff, check out my recent live stream and recent video on YouTube here, and it'll help fill in some gaps. And I've done some presentations on some of this material. So if you're finding yourself not understanding some of these concepts or whatever, I think that reviewing some of that stuff could be helpful. And also, I just have to say, Freemasonry, it's Hermeticism. It has a lot to do with Hermes and Mercury and associated principles. And so that's why I think that this is a really good fit to get into, some Hermetic symbolism, since we're breaking down the wand and the magician, etc. So here's another version. So this is from the Tarot of the Holy Light. And here you can see that the magician here is nude, showing his penis. You can see here that he has two wands, and these two wands have entwined serpents going up it. And this looks very much right like the caduceus, but there's several variations of that kind of wand or staff. But it's very appropriate that the magician would be carrying these. And I think it's interesting too that this deck creator corresponds the element of air with the magician. And this mercurial association, Mercury actually rules two different signs. It rules Mercury, which is an air sign, and then it also rules Virgo, which is an earth sign. So that's something that's worth keeping in mind, I guess, throughout this presentation as well, is the heavy air symbolism that corresponds with Mercury. But also there is this earth symbolism too that can't be denied. And I actually found the original image for this guy here in the center. And what that deck does, that deck is great, by the way, if you've never heard of it, Tarot of the Holy Light. She's actually a local creator. And what she does is she takes just old alchemical artwork and she remixes it to create these tarot cards. And I personally think she does a great job. But I was kind of stoked to see that I came across the original illustration here. And so this is important, but notice that this mercurial figure is in the middle, And then to the left, you have a figure that apparently is symbolic of the sun. And then on the right, you have another figure that corresponds with the moon. So this gets into this middle way sort of concept. Um, I've found a lot of artwork over the last few months where it's showing a mercurial figure operating outside of the solar lunar duality. And I think that this is what this illustration is also representing essentially. So it looks as though these two figures represent the duality of the sun and of the moon. And notice that they have weapons with them. And so they are, they're having an issue with this mercurial figure here. And that's another thing that you'll find that just think is just really, really interesting is that there are a number of instances where a mercurial figure is actually being destroyed in some way or violence is being used against them. And so this is what's happening here. And so when you live, in duality and everything is black and white, um, you probably aren't going to like the person or the energetic quality of someone who is freely able to kind of ride that spectrum from black to white. And to me, this is what the middle path is all about. The middle path, the mercurial path, is all about kind of this androgynous concept. It's about being part of the whole spectrum of things. So understanding the black and understanding the white, understanding the light and understanding the dark, understanding your masculine qualities and your feminine qualities. And so Mercury is very much tied to androgyny that way, because a lot of figures who are magical and who embrace the mercurial path, the middle way, they know that, in this reality, if you want to get a lot of things done, if you want to manifest and create, having the ability to kind of embrace both sides of yourself, the masculine and the feminine, the light and the dark, that is the way to go. That's where you want to be. And so that is my understanding of how this all breaks down. And so that's what I think that this artwork is representing that middle way, that middle path, the mercurial path, where you are uniting opposites essentially. And so here is the Morgan Greer Magician card. I love this one. The Morgan Greer is great for a lot of different reasons. I just like how simple the deck is, but everything pops, and I like kind of just like the vintage sort of aesthetic. There's a lot to appreciate. But notice the large rod or wand that he's holding up there, right? It's very, very emphasized. And so notice that the wand has these two bulbs, right, on the ends. And so this is very much symbolic of, polarity, right? The positive and the negative. So just think about electricity or magnetism. And notice that he's holding the wand right up in the air, but down below the table that he has before him, look how organized it is. And this is generally the thing that I feel like should be taken away from the magician is that he has control over the elements. That's what the table represents. I think the table represents perhaps Earth, right? Kind of like the foundation of Earth and the ground. And then this is the place where the elements can come and play. They can come and mix, and they can do things, and they can, generate all sorts of new possibilities together. But the elements are organized, guys. And so this is what the wand represents, this as above, so below posture. It represents the order being brought to chaos, because there are these older concepts that basically say that the beginning of the universe was very chaotic and that all of the elements were kind of amalgamated together, and that there was I believe it used to be called like a primal heap of just stuff. And so everything was kind of blended together. There was no real order to anything. And so everything was just blended. And so what happened, my understanding, according to the mythology And if you want to know more about some of this specific stuff, I did a presentation on Interverse called Decoding Chaos, and I get into some of the symbolism. But my understanding is that it was the world axis that brought order. It was the world axis that separated the above from the below so that there could be space for things to exist and for there to be this sandbox that we call reality where things come together and break apart. And so to me, that is like a direct symbolic correspondence here is that that rod is symbolic of order. And so this is why a lot of kings are associated with scepters, and that's what the staff represents. That's kind of what your spine represents. This is what the world axis symbolically represents. It represents order. It represents something that everything can revolve around. And so this to me is what is being communicated. So here's an older illustration of God untangling the chaos. And so this is what I get into in that decoding chaos presentation. And so once again, apparently the primordial universe, all of the elements were mixed together until a paternal figure, God, came and untangled everything. And so this is him in the act of untangling, of bringing about order. And notice too that he is also doing the as above, so below posture. One hand is up, one hand is down. I believe this illustration here, which is called the Weeping Virgin, I've been talking about it a lot over the last 6 months, but I think it really communicates just so much valuable information. I just love kind of bringing it around because it really encodes just so much great stuff. But notice what you have here. You have a woman, the Weeping Virgin, symbolic of Virgo, and she is right in front of a broken pillar, right? And so this broken pillar is symbolic of chaos. So a complete upright pillar is symbolic of order, as I've been saying. That's what the wand brings. A broken pillar represents chaos. And so there are like a surprising amount of examples actually of young maiden women basically posing with broken pillars. You know, there's different illustrations and paintings where a Virgo like figure is before a broken pillar. And this to me is symbolic of the idea that chaos is this, there's an ancient feminine aspect to chaos. And when I say chaos, I don't think of anything negative personally. And so there's this old idea that chaos is a feminine quality and that order is more of a masculine quality. And so here, I think what they're showing is they're showing Father Time, Kronos, a very Saturnian figure, the masculine figure. Look at how he's untangling her hair because this is symbolic of that male energy bringing order to chaos. So whether you're untangling the elements from the primordial universe or you're untangling Virgo's hair, and Virgo is the queen of heaven. And so I think that it's pretty much saying some similar things here. Here's another example. And obviously, just to say too, to untangle that hair, one hand is above and one hand is below. But here's another example of God separating things. And so here it appears as though he's separating daytime from nighttime. So when the universe was in chaos and it was more primordial, everything was together. So nothing was separate. So this idea of separation, bringing about order, I think is something that I find a lot of value in. And so here you can see his arms are separating daytime from nighttime. And I think it's alluding to the fact that he's doing this for the very first time. And so the idea here is that the magician, with this posture and with the wand in hand, Symbolically, he is the one who separates and connects the above with the below. And so I think that is what's being communicated here. And so notice that above the wand, at the very top of the canvas, you have these flowers and leaves and everything else. And then down below, similarly, you have the same thing. So it's kind of wild in a way up top, and it's even more wild down below. And so you actually kind of see this separation kind of going on. So he is separating the above with the below, but he is also the one that connects the above with the below. This is a really important distinction. It's both a separation and a connection thing that's going on here, both with the position of the magician and his arms being above and below, and the wand itself. So in a way, the wand is kind of like the perfect like distillation of the symbolism that his posture is conveying, as is the number one. Well, I mean, this reminds me an awful lot of Baphomet, right? And so Baphomet has his as above, so below posture. Um, on his right arm or its right arm, it says solve, which means dissolve. And then on the other forearm, it says coagula, which means to coagulate. And so that is to say, dissolve and coagulate. So breaking things down and bringing things together. And so that sounds an awful lot like separation and connection, right? Um, there's a lot to say about Baphomet and that whole history and what it represents, but to me personally, I just see a lot of Mercurial symbolism going on. So I just feel as though Baphomet is a updated symbol of Mercury. But I also think that about a lot of other deities, to be quite honest. And so I think Mercury really is a huge, huge um, archetypal deity to get into in order to understand all sorts of different secrets. So that's what I see here. But notice what's going on in the lap of Baphomet, right? And obviously, before I get on to the next slide, Baphomet is androgynous. Is it masculine? Is it feminine? Is it an angel? Is it a demon? What's going on here? And the answer is yes. It's all of those things. So it very much is the divine androgyne. But notice in the lap of Baphomet, here you have a pole with two snakes wrapped around it, and then you see this arc just behind it. In my opinion, yes, it's symbolic of a phallus. It's a penis. And sometimes the illustration, this is the classic Eliphas Levi version of Baphomet, but there are other illustrations and statues and whatnot where it shows Baphomet with an erect penis and not necessarily just a pole. But to me, this is the world axis, guys. I think that the arc is symbolic of the firmament, and I think that bulb up top is symbolic of Polaris or the pole star. And again, the world axis is the way in which the psychopomp energy of Mercury, Hermes, Thoth goes from plane to plane, from place to place. The way I tend to say it is that the northern sky is the preeminent gateway for astral travel and is the stairway to heaven. And so I think that is what's being encoded here. I think that Baphomet being a mercurial figure, it makes a lot of sense that it would be associated with the world pole or world axis. And it is very, very common to have the world axis in whatever way it's created or generated, because there are a lot of correspondences with the world axis, including the tree, and like I was saying earlier, the mountain and the rod and what have you. It is not uncommon to have world axis symbolism connected to serpents. This is just like really common old stuff, right? And so here you see them wrapping around that rod there. And it looks exactly like the caduceus. It looks exactly like what Mercury is always associated with. And so this is similar too, by the way, of the Kundalini serpents going up the spine. I think it's all the same stuff, basically. It's the same energetic quality. It looks the same. It's the two being unified into one. and it's symbolic of ascension. Here's another version of Hermes, and you could see the snakes are actually the it looks like the head of one of the snakes is broken, but you can see it there in his right arm, with the wings up top, and then you can see too that the handle is coming through his fingers there, his index and middle finger, and it looks very very phallic. I think that is obviously intentional because that is the symbolism that we are just dealing with here. So this is a wand that was associated with Mercury way back when, and so you could see again, um, it's the middle pillar column sort of idea, but then also these twin serpents uh, wrapping around each other, and so this idea or this concept, this wand or staff, has taken so many different like variations over the years that is like a whole study in and of itself, but I believe this is called the Karukion. And Mercury himself has taken on many, many, many different forms over time, which I do have a slide about that. But he has expressed himself in so many different ways. So he is very slithery that way. He's kind of hard to pin down, but that is actually his power. So after a while, I kind of realized that that was the deal, and then I'm like, oh, I gotcha. That is why you are like, um, it's necessary to know what you're all about because you seemingly encompass so many different things that I was getting confused, but actually. That's one of your like greatest assets and attributes is that you are associated with so many different things. So you could see the similarity with that and the caduceus. Again, very, very similar symbolism. Um, the caduceus too, right? And the I believe it's the rod of Asclepius is very much associated with medical symbolism. And so that could be a whole episode in and of itself. That's actually a really fascinating rabbit hole. But medical symbolism is something that I felt like I needed to bring up at least once. But again, the central pole is the world axis. It's the cosmic axis, and I think that's what you're seeing here. And you're seeing something traveling up that world axis, which mythologically is generally tied to very mercurial figures. And this slide here is just to show you that serpent symbolism is really, really commonly paired with world axis symbolism. And here, the world axis is obviously the tree, not unlike the Yggdrasil, the world tree. Right. So, because we're getting into mercurial symbolism, I had to bring up this illustration. So, this artist is new to me, Arnaldus Westerhovius. This comes from 1735. And I am really lucky to have a friend who actually collects really old prints. And so that's who introduced me to this artist here and to some of these prints. So this is a scan from a print that he has in person. And when I started looking at it, I was like, well, geez, everything here is centered around Mercury. And there's a few other illustrations that he showed me, and I noticed the exact same thing, that Mercury plays a really, really big role in this guy's artwork. And generally, the pieces are very, very dense. So there is a lot going on here that we could talk about. So I'm just going to be focusing on the first thing I noticed and why I think it's significant and why I think it'll help kind of fill in the gaps with the symbolism of all things related to Mercury. But just notice the general sort of setup with this piece. Notice the concentric rings. Okay. And so the concentric rings, which I've been talking about in other videos, by the way. So this information is just starting to stack on top of each other. But the concentric ring idea is very much tied to Mercury. It's very much tied to northern or polar symbolism. and this idea of ring lands and of things emanating from a sacred center. Notice these concentric rings and notice that there's a figure in the middle of these rings. So obviously, the idea was to bring your eye inward to that location. And so the next slide here, I'm going to show you a zoomed in um just version of the artwork there right in the middle. So here you can see we are right in the middle of the concentric rings now. And what do you see? You see a figure, and it looks like he's being handed a caduceus. And it looks like the figure who's handing him the caduceus is Mercury himself. You can see his winged feet, and this figure is throned. And in one hand, it looks like he's grabbing the caduceus, and then in the other hand, you see that it's hovering right over a pillar. And so this central deity, what I would argue is the supreme deity. They're showing you that he is symbolic of the sacred center and therefore symbolic of pillars and poles and columns and wands and staffs and scepters, just like the world axis. So I believe that that is what's being communicated here. It's world axis symbolism, and I'm having a really, really good time looking at some older artwork and decoding it through the polar tradition because there is just a lot going on there. So I think too that the supreme deity is probably more closely associated with Mercury than like any other planet. I know a lot of times he's associated with Jupiter or the sun. I think that Mercury is kind of where it's at personally. So I think a lot of things that we talk about in mythology and symbolism are actually mercurial in nature. And so if there is one deity or one planet that I would point to kind of unpack what's going on with polar symbolism, absolutely like 100% it's Mercury. And so, again, just going back, the concentric rings are all centered around this one deity in the middle, this one figure who is throned, and there is blatant pillar symbolism there, and then there's blatant mercurial symbolism there with the caduceus. So I thought that was worth pointing out. And so here's an illustration of Hermes showing you once again, as though it needs to be proven as many times as I'm doing it here, but that he is associated with pillars. He is associated with pillars and posts and poles. Notice that he is leaning on one of the pillars, right? And notice that there's two. So whenever you have two pillars, there is an implied third pillar. There is an implied gateway. There is an implied door in the middle. And so that is where Hermes is right here. He is the implied third pillar, or he is going through that gateway. And so notice too that he's on one foot. So once again, this 1 foot, one-legged tippy toe sort of thing is really baked into so many different works of art that correspond with Mercury Hermes Thoth. It's completely insane. But I just love the fact that he actually has one hand on a pillar and he's making the as above, so below sort of gesture too. One hand is above, another is below. One foot is grounded, another one is lifted. So that's the deal, just kind of like what I've been going through already. But the one hand on the pillar just reminds me that he's associated with the single pillar, not just two pillars, but the single pillar. So when you're dealing with symbolism that has two pillars, each individual pillar, I would argue, is very mercurial in nature. And the dual pillars show up all over the place. They're all over the tarot. They're all over Freemasonry. So the High Priestess, right? This is number 2, and so it's really interesting that the second card, Roman numeral 2, has two pillars on it. And I'm sure most of you guys here probably know this already, but the pomegranates on that banner behind her, they're laid out just like the tree of life, the Kabbalistic tree of life. And so she, the high priestess here in this illustration, she is symbolic of this third pillar as well, or she's symbolic of this middle way as well, being between the two. And there's other cards too that show this twin pillar sort of thing going on. Um, Also, it's interesting that twin pillars very much relates to Gemini, and Gemini corresponds with Mercury. It's ruled by Mercury. It's not uncommon to see twin pillars like in front of synagogues like this one because they were supposedly in front of Solomon's temple as well, which I believe is, allegorical, Solomon and Solomon's temple, but there you go. Even the Torah scrolls are twin pillars, and so this is part of their symbolism. This isn't me just kind of like, making assumptions here, but the Torah scrolls, the two scrolls are symbolic very much of these twin pillars as well. And once again, the single pillar is very, very mercurial. Obviously, in Freemasonry, you're going to see twin pillars all over the place. And so you can tell this is just like a little local lodge, but you can see the twin pillars, in the flesh physically. And then you can see the twin pillars in the painting on the wall. And here's a Freemasonic tracing board. The twin pillars are there. And so, again, if you're looking at twin pillars, you have to acknowledge the invisible, the hidden middle pillar or middle way, which is why you see the eye up top. So, this is the Kabbalistic tree of life. I'm sure many of you guys here are probably familiar with it. But what's worth noting is that the Kabbalistic tree of life is most easily broken down with three pillars. So obviously on the left, you have the pillar of severity, and then on the right, you have the pillar of mercy. But then you also have this central pillar. And notice that this central pillar goes above and below the other pillars. The two side pillars get most of the attention from like symbologists and things like that, but it's this central pillar, at least right now, that I am like the most intrigued by, because this central pillar is symbolic of, in my opinion, the first pillar. I tend to call it the third pillar, but I think in many ways it's really representative of the first pillar. And then these two other pillars of duality, of polarity, broke off from this first central pillar. And so that's what I'm saying, with the earlier illustration with the eye being in between the pillars but above. It's also symbolic of the third eye as well, and of the world axis, in my opinion. But it all comes down to just one pillar, right? Which is the heart of this presentation. Well, this gets into some interesting information regarding these statues that were called Herms or Hermas from like the Greco-Roman era. And this is a rabbit hole that we could go down that I could do way more research on. But I've seen these statues over the years, and it is very, very appropriate to talk about them here. And so obviously you see the statue with the man's head up top and then a penis down below. And my understanding is that these statues used to be put at all of the prominent crossroads, in Greece and Rome way back in the day. And that they always had a phallus, sometimes very erect and very large. And they would be at the crossroads because Hermes, Mercury, Thoth, guys, completely related to the crossroads, completely related to travel and from going to and fro and things like that. So these statues being placed at crossroads, I think, is very, very, very mercurial and makes a lot of sense. And then just notice how vertical and upright and phallic the whole entire statue is in and of itself. And so here you have another version. And my understanding too is that there was a point in time in which I know there's at least one story where all of the local Herm statues had their penises cut off in the middle of the night as part of a revolt, which I think is very, very intriguing. But again, just notice how vertical and upright this is, very much symbolic of the world axis itself. The penis to me just emphasizes that even more so. And it wasn't uncommon, my understanding is, for some of these herms or hermas to have a crossbeam attached to them as well. And so this just reminds me very much of the cross. And I am of the opinion these days that the cross comes from the world axis, and that before there were crosses, there were pillars or standing stones or whatever. But the vertical statue, the vertical obelisk, um, that came before the cross, in my opinion. And so here you have another example. And my understanding too is that there have been cults in antiquity where they would create a statue, probably not unlike this one, and they would actually have young women lose their virginity to the statue, and that they would put a sacred oil on the phallus. They would lose their virginity, and this was just part of how they did things. So I'm not sure if it's the Herms or the Hermas, but I have read that more than once. And so again, notice the crossbeam here. It reminds me very much of the cross, right? And so I have another slide here just kind of showing you what the cross looks like when everything is proportional. I think that the cross or the X more than likely was a polar northern symbol way back when, and then at some point was updated to become more associated with the sun and heliocentrism. So I think a lot of symbols associated with solar energy or with heliocentrism more than likely started off as being polar in nature, meaning the pole star and the world axis, and that whole tradition, the polar tradition. And then, were later translated or misunderstood, whatever you want to say, but basically became more affiliated with solar sun based energy. And so, as I was saying, the crossroads, the cross, and then the crossroads. The middle of the crossroads, that is the point symbolically of ascension, guys. And I think it's really interesting that there's even this post here at this crossroads. And so I believe it's Robert, is it Johnson or Johnston, who wrote Devil at the Crossroads, something along those lines. I was just listening to that song like yesterday or the day before, and that whole song is alchemical. That whole song is all about mercurial symbolism. So at one point he says that he's going to the crossroads or he's at the crossroads, and he fell on his knees. There's alchemical illustrations where Mercury is getting his legs chopped off from Saturn. But point being, that song and crossroad related symbolism is very mercurial in nature. So again, the herms were placed at the crossroads. You go to the crossroads, and now it's your choice whether you're going to go north, south, east, or west. Right? It's a point in which you can get to other places. And so, symbolically, I would say that we kind of live in a crossroads sort of reality or domain. I think we're kind of in between multiple spaces. And your life, it's almost like every single day you live at a crossroads. You have decisions to make. What are you going to do with your life, with your time? How are you going to spend your day? Are you going to be doing things that are going to benefit you or benefit others? Or are you going to do things that maybe are going to be detrimental to you or others? Are you following the right path? Are you doing what you want to do? Do you know who you are and what you're all about? Do you know where your true north is? And so, crossroad symbolism, it's super deep, and I think it's interesting that even it's called crossroads, right? The crossroads. It makes a lot of sense. But the cross in and of itself and the number 4 is also very much related to Hermes and very much related to Mercury. I wanted to put a few slides in there about that, but I think it's just going to have to wait for another time because it's too much of a tangent. But the cross and the number 4 absolutely have hermetic kind of like signatures embedded within them. And so to me, this makes a lot of sense. Sometimes Hermes is referred to as the Lord of the Crossroads, and Hecate is sometimes referred to as Lady of the Crossroads. So, yeah, this could be a whole thing in and of itself. Crossroads symbolism, the various rituals that have happened at crossroads, the various statues that have been placed at the crossroads. By the way, my understanding is regarding the herms, the phallic herms. At one point, those were destroyed or taken down and replaced with crucifixes. So that's a whole entire thing in and of itself. Another cross symbol at the crossroads. So Hermes Mercury, he is associated with travel, right? And so here you can see him traveling above the globe. It almost looks like he's spinning the globe with his feet, right? So he is a traveler. He's the messenger of the gods. It's not uncommon for him to have a pouch or a bag with messages. And so he is always going to and fro. And one of the things I've always noticed too is that he kind of looks like he has a runner's body, usually. You know, he's usually not very muscular. He's usually thinner. And oftentimes he looks like a young runner. And so here they are corresponding the spin of the spin of Earth with the movement of Mercury. And so it's really fascinating. Mercury both has a lot of symbolism attached to it that implies movement and spinning and running or flying, but also stillness. And this is perfectly encapsulated in the gear or wheel that he's holding in his left hand. You see the gear or wheel, and you see that there's a wing attached. This implies movement. So obviously, what does the wheel do? It spins. It spins around what? A central axis. What does the Earth spin around under the heliocentric globe Earth model? It spins around the North Pole around a central axis. This is the world axis. And so Mercury is always associated with movement and with spin. But what has changed over time, in my opinion, is just the perception of what is actually spinning. So in the geocentric era, people would say that the stars were spinning and everything in the heavens was spinning around us, around the cosmic or world axis. And then under heliocentrism, the belief is that everything is spinning around the sun. And so there's been a transference of spin from what we believed was spinning above our heads to now we on Earth, under most people's cosmology, we spin around the sun and everything is spinning and moving and rotating, and it's, rotations within rotations, right? But Mercury has been associated with this spin, and so that's why I really like this gear or wheel, because it is very much symbolic of that. And again, the wheel spins around an axle or an axis, which is what the caduceus in his other hand represents. Also, I've been wanting to say that Mercury, at least here, what it reminds me of is just the fact that our legs symbolically are our wheels. And so I was watching mixed martial arts like several months ago, and one of the commentators said that, if this guy's legs were going to be hit too many more times, he's going to lose his wheels, and he wouldn't be able to get around. And so I thought that was a brilliant sort of insight, the fact that our legs are our wheels, which this gets into a whole nother rabbit hole too, symbolically, which I think is totally interesting, but we'll have to unpack it another time. So here you can see a Mercurial Hermes type figure on a stamp. I love this stamp. I think it's super cool. And it's kind of implying this spin, right? The spin of Earth around a central axis, just like the caduceus that he's holding. And what a perfect sort of way to kind of communicate travel, right? Is using Mercury here. being the messenger of the gods, being the psychopomp or conductor of souls, meaning that he takes people to the afterlife. He's familiar with all of the realms because he travels there via the world axis, in my opinion. He's also doing the one-legged thing again, which I think is curious. And I'm just noticing right now that he's doing it on top of the eye in air. So that's kind of a nice touch. I wonder if that was intentional. Probably. But this world axis, by the way, I've said it before, but it's very much related to the post or the pillar. But I believe this is where we get postage from and the post office from. It's a mercurial symbol of the world axis. And I've said this already, but the main axis, the main rod or column or pillar is the world pillar. And so this is the idea that there is a symbolic pillar from the northern part of Earth to the northern part of the sky. And Polaris, the pole star, is very much symbolic of this. And if you look at the night sky, you will notice that all of the stars, including the stars of the zodiac, revolve around this central axis in the night sky. So it's literally the spin of the heavens, I believe, is encoded with all things mercurial. And his wand is symbolic of the axle of the heavens. And there is a toroidal sort of aspect here. So this illustration doesn't directly show a spiral effect, but you can imagine, closer towards the center of the toroid, that there is a spiraling nature kind of going on. I believe that the toroid, unlocks a lot of really interesting symbolism. I know that there's a toroid around Earth, and so this opening in the middle would be the axle of the heavens, and this would be how Mercury travels, between realms and all of that. And so I'm sure most of you guys are probably familiar with the toroid or Taurus symbolism, but if you're unaware, you should definitely look into it. I think it plays a really, really big part in kind of a lot of things. But needless to say, there is this central pole that goes through the Taurus field. And I think it's really interesting. So this is the Chariot card by Barbara Walker. And guys, it's really fascinating to me, but the charioteer is very, very mercurial. And so when I see him now, I tend to think of Mercury. And that I'm going to repeat myself here, but that could be a whole episode in and of itself. But just think of like the spin of the chariot wheels themselves. Here you could even see the axle of the chariot itself, right? From the left wheel to the right wheel. So this is the churning of the cosmos, the churning of heaven. Um, and whether you're talking about a horse or you're talking about a boat or you're talking about a chariot or you're talking about a train or a car, um, vehicle symbolism, travel symbolism is related to the afterlife journey. And so to me, when I see this figure now in the chariot, is he playing a psychopomp role? Is he a conductor of souls? Is he the one who leads others to the afterlife? I think so. I think that's kind of what's being implied here. And so when I came across this card, which I do have, I was really pleased to see that Barbara Walker, who is a great author, by the way, um, she's written several books on symbolism. She has a tarot deck. She's really interesting, in my opinion. But I love the fact that she put the symbol for Mercury on the front of the chariot here. And so this is just like brilliant in my opinion. It makes a lot of sense for the reasons I just explained. And so the traditional setup for this card, it'll show the chariot tier within the chariot, and generally there are four posts or pillars around him, and there generally is some sort of canopy, and the canopy is blue and usually has stars within it. And so this is the version from the Rider Waite. And I've broken this down before on different shows and videos. But what you're seeing here is you're seeing a figure in the middle of these four posts, and the star on top of his head is symbolic of the pole star of Polaris, the North Star. And so I think that this kind of further solidifies the idea that we're dealing with a mercurial figure here. And so notice that he also has a wand that he's holding in his right hand. And these four posts, it's symbolic of the four directions or the four corners, the four fixed signs. And it's so that the firmament or the vault of heaven has something to kind of stand on. It's kind of symbolic of the pillars that hold up the night sky or hold up the sky. And so the charioteer would be symbolic of being right in the middle of these pillars, which would place him somewhere in the north. And I think that this star is representative of that. Um, Also, too, the fact that the chariot card is number 7. 7 is related to the North Star in so many different ways, but the main one I tend to talk about is the fact that the Little Dipper and Big Dipper, Ursa Minor and Ursa Major, each have 7 stars, and they're circumpolar constellations, so they revolve around Polaris. And a lot of Ascension texts talk about the number 7 and also talk about the northern sky as like an ascension point. So I think that's all encoded within this card. So yeah, so I just wanted to point that out, but I think it's brilliant to associate the charioteer with Mercury for sure. And speaking of 7 and everything that I've just gone over, notice in this illustration, which I just came across, I think for the first time not too long ago, but I absolutely love this illustration, guys. This encodes everything that I'm talking about. It's beautiful. I believe it's Freemasonic in origin. It's for I think it's like a 33rd degree sort of I don't know what you would call it, like certificate or something that basically says, "Hey, this is where you're at with everything." And it just says it all, in my opinion. You've got the 7 stars in the night sky, very close to this central pillar, which again I would either call the third pillar or the first pillar. It's a depiction of Jacob's ladder, and so you see a ladder ascending up to the heavens, and you see these angels coming up or going down this ladder. Those 7 stars are symbolic of Ursa Major or Minor. It's symbolic of this central axis, this world axis, and of the stairway to heaven. So the stairway to heaven symbolically exists, and it has a lot to do with the northern sky. So obviously, there are 2 other pillars, but this central one is the largest one. It's the one that looks like it actually truly ascends. It's opening up the heavens, and it's just emblematic of everything that I'm talking about, guys. Also, the vine going up this central column too, very much similar to the caduceus and the serpents going up the wand, right? And yeah, I think this is great. So I want to talk about it more, and I'm sure I will. So I was looking through one of my books and I came across this illustration. So I scanned it. It's called Thoth of the Four Winds. And so this is a later painting, I believe, in ancient Egypt. And it's to me, it's just amazing the fact that you have Thoth, which, by the way, if I haven't said this yet, Thoth has the head of an ibis. And so the ibis headed Thoth is Mercury. It is Hermes, right? The Egyptian equivalent at the very least. And they're holding onto this central post or central pillar, whatever you want to call it, the world axis. And so to me, that the fact that this is just like the emphasis for this artwork, I find to be very, very intriguing. So I have not looked into it further, but to me, it symbolically kind of says a lot of the things that I'm already implying here. But this is Thoth of the Four Winds. And for a while, I've wanted to know why the ibis head, what's going on there. And I just recently reread this little fact, this belief that the reason why the ibis was chosen to be associated with the mercurial energy of the day, I think there's a few reasons why, but in part, one of the reasons was the fact that the ibis will stand on one leg for like a long time, apparently, and they just stand there with one leg. And I've been talking about one-legged symbolism and what this represents. It represents stillness, and there's a meditative quality to this position. So anyone who does yoga, a lot of the one-legged poses definitely kind of puts you in that mindset, right? But this one leg, guys, is symbolic of the world axis, which is, to me, it's just trippy that there's so much going on here. And I feel like the information, once again, is just like stacking on top of each other. But to me, it makes a lot of sense. The fact that we would see the magician with this one legged thing going on, Hermes with this one legged thing, and then the ibis bird, which corresponds with Mercury, also having one-legged symbolism attached, to me is just absolutely fascinating. So you can imagine that this one leg is kind of like an axis or an axle of sorts, or it's implied that there's a stillness kind of going on there, which that's what the pole star represents, the northern sky. But the pole star in particular represents stillness because it's not moving like the other stars move great distances, in the night sky from the perception of earth, but the north star is always still. And so here, once again, we just see another version of Mercury. I have not looked this one up, but it does appear to me that this is a figure on the right hand side that's symbolic of Virgo. She's holding the wheat, and then she's holding a little figure in her hand. And so I think she's a Virgo figure. And Virgo, as I said earlier, is ruled by Mercury. And so I think what you might be seeing is the planetary association with the zodiac sign of Virgo. And there, Hermes Mercury is with his staff, with his wand, with the twin serpents. Um, yeah. So I just thought this was a nice image, and I don't think I've seen it before. So this staff, as I've been saying, just like the wand, it brings order. And so, for those of you guys who don't know, I'm pretty much just of the opinion that Christ, way back when, was definitely more so compared with Mercury than he was with the sun. And so this is why he holds this staff, in my opinion. He's holding the staff for a few reasons, but this staff, as I've been saying with the wand, it brings order. And so look how he's bringing order to the situation, right? So he is the good shepherd. And there's also a lot of mercurial figures who have also been called the good shepherd. But with his staff, he brings order to chaos. And that is what a good paternal figure does. That's what a good parent does. And you could say that maybe that quality is more paternal in nature. But he's bringing order to a situation, and he is playing the role of the psychopomp or conductor of souls. So he's leading a flock, right? Which I believe symbolically, to me, just represents leading people to the afterlife as well. And here is a hermetic version of the Good Shepherd. I believe his name is Creophoros, something like that. But Hermes Mercury also has been called the Good Shepherd, and so I think the symbolism is just like there's so much overlapping stuff here. It kind of is crazy to think about. But when I look at Christ, I can't not think of mercurial symbolism now, especially way back when. I know that there's older depictions of him holding like a wand and doing magic and things like that. And so that's kind of been sanitized and has evolved over time. But I think the symbolism with the staff is virtually the same. It brings order. And then here is a hermetic figure, also who is known as the Good Shepherd. And so again, wands and scepters and staffs and stuff, kings have often been associated with them because of their supposed law-giving symbolism as well. This is something that I've gotten into in other shows, but the idea that the cosmic axis is very much related to law and authority, and so it would just make sense the phallic nature of the world axis or of the world pole would be transferred over, and royal families and whatnot would basically use the same symbolism when they're holding a rod or a staff or what have you. That there's just a direct sort of correspondence with the order the world axis brings and the supposed order that's implied when you hold something like this. The world axis, as I've gone over before, has a number of associations. Very quickly, the phallus, the pole, the pillar, the post, the column, the world tree, the tower, the staff, the scepter, the obelisk, the sword, stairway, the ladder, the thigh, and the leg, which we've gotten into a little bit here, right? The spine, the vine, the lingam, the spear, the bridge, the axle, the branch. That's another important aspect here that I didn't make a specific slide about, but the branch and wand symbolism, there's a lot going on with all of that. Um, Also, the mountain is very much emblematic of this world axis, as is the omphalos. And if you're unfamiliar with the omphalos, you should definitely look that up and get used to kind of understanding what it symbolically represents. So I haven't really gotten into it on my channel, but it's definitely an important thread. So the hermetic title for the magician is the Magus of Power. And so here you can see like a traditional, like a ceremonial magician, right, with his wand. And it looks as though, I haven't really decoded what's going on in his left hand. If anyone out there understands what's going on with his left hand, is it a scroll? I'm inclined to think it might be a scroll, but it could be something else. But here you can see that he's manifesting, he's generating, he's creating, and that's what this wand represents too, guys. And that's what the phallus represents too, is this like procreative sort of power, to manifest. And so that's what he's doing here, obviously in a very like mystical sort of way. And what is he manifesting? It looks like he's manifesting an actual emanation of Mercury himself. And Mercury's doing the one-legged thing, kind of the tiptoe thing. He has one hand up, he has one hand below, and he's holding the caduceus, right? And there's concentric rings emanating from his central body, which looks like really the middle of it would be the navel. And so the navel very much corresponds to the center of Earth. Um, and that's what the omphalos also too corresponds with. But yeah, so it would make sense that ceremonial magicians and mystics would revere Mercury. And here you can see the symbol for Mercury up top on this card. And here's another expression of Mercury, right? This is Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great. And man, when I saw this recently, it kind of it just it was it was pleasantly surprising, just to kind of finally wrap my head around the symbolism behind what's going on here. Because I've seen this image over the years, but I feel like I kind of understand it on another level now. And so here you have Hermes Trismegistus on the left, very much symbolic of Mercury and that middle path, and he is looking at he's almost looking like directly at us, but he's pointing at the sun and the moon on the right hand side. And in my opinion, what I am picking up from this now is that he is operating outside of that duality or polarity, just like the pole star, right? And so this is what I've been saying, is that the pole star is part of a trinity, and the trinity would be sun, moon, pole star, the north star. And so because I'm making so many references to Mercury and the world axis, I make the correspondence between Polaris and what's going on the mercurial side of things. And so to me, this is just kind of showing you that hey, the sun and moon exist, but I operate outside of that system, or I'm a synthesis of that system. I am a combination of those energies. I know how to be solar and I know how to be lunar. I know how to project and I know how to receive. I'm a magician. I'm an alchemist. So I am more mercurial. I understand these energies, and I know how to use them to my advantage for creative purposes, for action oriented or manifestation purposes. But I am neither exclusively solar nor exclusively lunar. In fact, I am more polar in nature, which is why on in his right hand he's holding a staff or a wand with obviously a globe around it. But guys, he's literally holding the world axis in his right hand. So cosmologically, I see what he's holding, the globe, and that's more of a heliocentric thing. But regardless, the symbolism is suggesting that he's holding the world axis. And so that's what he's saying. That's what I get from this, at least. And there are many examples of this. So I'm kind of stoked to talk about this more. So at some point, I think I'm going to gather some of these images and start talking about the sun and the moon and how things operate outside of that system, or at the very least, the sun and the moon. Um, there's a third quality that needs to be acknowledged when you're talking about the sun and moon, and it is the pole star. So here are some mercurial associations in case you weren't aware. He is looked at often as a trickster deity. There's a lot to be said about that. There's a very strong traveling component with him. Obviously, he's the messenger of the gods. He has the secrets of the afterlife and the afterlife journey. He's very much androgynous. So androgyny is a very big thing here. Again, kind of like the sun and the moon. He knows how to embrace both sides, and he knows that if you want to manifest here or do things here, it makes sense to be more mercurial in nature. He's associated with changes and transitions. Obviously, magic, alchemy, and mysticism are part of everything that he's associated with. Choices are another thing. Makes a lot of sense. I think of Gemini and the duality, polarity of Gemini. He corresponds with the phallus and with messages, messenger of the gods. He's associated with mischief, kind of going back to the trickster thing. He's like a deity of commerce. I would say he's very, very elusive. Again, he's very slithery, and I think that Mercury is something of a shape shifter because he operates on the spectrum and he can go between, again, the positive end of the spectrum and the negative end of the spectrum at his choosing. So it makes him a very, very elusive character. He's very cunning, very much associated with illusions as well. And that's a whole interesting side sort of thing. The idea of manifestation producing illusions, and kind of a lot of our reality being very illusory in nature. He also corresponds with good fortune too. And this is just a very, very quick list as well. So this could easily be expanded upon and be a whole episode or slideshow in and of itself. And as I was making this presentation, it really got me thinking about the Kabbalion, which is Hermetic philosophy, right? By the three initiates. And so there's people out there who say that the Kabbalion is not Hermetic at all and that it's way too new, and, it's hanging on the coattails of real Hermeticism, but it's kind of like bubblegum mall Hermeticism. And that's fine. If people want to have that opinion, I don't mind at all. But the main thing I just want to say is that the Kabbalion and its seven principles, the seven Hermetic principles, are very much related to the pole, guys. It's really, really intriguing to me. So, as an example, the first one is mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental. Correspondence. This is where it starts getting way more obvious. Correspondence, as above, so below, as below, so above. This reminds me a lot of The pole that we're talking about, vibration, nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates, very much like Mercury in and of himself. Polarity, everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites, right? Rhythm, everything flows out and in, everything has its tides, all things rise and fall. Cause and effect, every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause, everything happens according to law. Gender is in everything, everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. So to me, when I see the seven hermetic principles, I think of polar symbolism for obvious reasons. So I felt like that was worth noting here. And again, the Kabbalion is hermetic philosophy, as in Hermes, right? As in Mercury and everything Mercurial. So this reminds me an awful lot, obviously, of magnetism and electromagnetism. And so, magnetism, I mean, where would we be without understanding what it does and how it operates? But a lot of the hermetic principles, you can make a presentation relating a lot of this stuff literally to the power of magnetism and how it creates our electromagnetic spectrum, and how understanding magnetism and polarity is how we are able to use modern day electricity as well, right? And so I felt like this was worth putting in here. Here you can see a basic magnet. One side is positive, the other is negative, and it just reminds me of the pole itself, right? And when we're dealing with magnetism, I just have to say it's really interesting that we have magnetism, and then we also have magic, and then we have mage or magus. And so, I think all of these things are very much related, right? But what you're dealing with is you're dealing with polarity and duality and the power of the pole, of the positive and the negative, and embracing both sides, the active and the passive, the masculine and the feminine, etc. So I think that's what you're dealing with here with the magician. I think that's what the pole or the wand represents. I think that's what the infinity symbol represents. I think that's what the number one represents. I think that's what the as above, so below sort of posture represents as well. But when you break it all down, I think there's a lot of correspondence with the world axis. And so here are a few illustrations that kind of depict this middle way that I've been talking about. So it's pretty clear here on the left with the left mound or cave, whatever it's supposed to be, is more solar. And then on the right, you have a similar setup, but it's more lunar. But it's in the middle when these energies come together. That's where you want to be. That is the Mercurial path. That is the third path. That is the middle way. Or, as I've been saying, this could have been, and it probably is actually, the original way, the first path, the first pillar or post or pole, and then the solar lunar energies kind of emanated forth. But here you can see some mercurial symbolism, right, with the serpents around the staff, and all of that. To me, this tracing board kind of shows a similar sort of thing, but here you have solar symbolism on the left, lunar symbolism on the right, and then the middle, you got the middle way, the seven-pointed star, and the stairway to heaven that goes to the northern sky, which is where the world axis is and the North Star is. And then this is by Geoffroy Boschart, one of my favorite artists. And this is actually from his Zodiac series. And this series is amazing if you've never seen it before, but this is his version of Gemini. And so this is appropriate given the fact that Gemini, once again, is ruled by Mercury itself. But it's kind of saying a lot of the similar stuff that I've been getting at, right? Here you have these two pillars, very much emblematic of the moon and the sun. So, therefore, most people would consider the moon to be feminine, and most people would consider the sun to be masculine. Although I'm very much open to the opposite being true. So I've heard people make that case, and I think it makes sense. So there's that. But this is the traditional sort of correspondence, regardless of what you might think of it. But it's, where you really want to be in life is you want to have a blending of these two energies. You don't want to be, in my opinion, all the way lunar or solar for very long. You really want to unify your opposites. That's kind of how I've been saying it. And so this can be manifested in real life by unifying the opposites, by being with a partner that complements you. And so therefore, you have your complement in real life. And so you can kind of bring a different energetic quality to their life and vice versa. And you guys can make it work together, right? This is the alchemical marriage. This is partly depicted in the Lover's card, right, which corresponds with Gemini. And so this is just showing polarity or duality unifying together. And I love the fact that he has a caduceus in the middle of the painting, and at the very top he has a mirror, which is really intriguing because obviously you're going to see your own reflection in the mirror. So to me, this kind of implies unifying your invisible self, your invisible twin. There's a bunch of other names for it that are kind of escaping me right now. Your ka, so your spirit or your soul, the other half of you. And so this is kind of where I'm getting at with everything, is just the unification of opposites, of being on the spectrum, of being able to go, to the left or to the right, positive, negative, light or dark, but being mercurial about it and being able to be a bit of a shapeshifter yourself. And so I think that most people, I think all people would benefit from kind of having this understanding personally, instead of being so rigid. Maybe being a little bit more malleable, could benefit you a bit. So that is what I have for you guys. Thank you for watching and hanging in there. And let me change my settings here a little bit. Hello, here I am once again. Um, and so, yeah, I believe that is the end of the line for the presentation. So if you guys got something out of that and you want to support the channel or find out more about who I am and what my deal is, you guys can go to symbolicstudies.com. So I have study packets over there. I've got poster prints over there, and a bunch of other things, links to all of my social media accounts, etc. And then if you guys appreciated, just kind of what I'm doing, and you want to support on a regular basis, or even just for a month or whatever, you guys can do that at patreon.com/symbolicstudies. I would very much appreciate it. And then also I am available for tarot readings and study sessions. So if you're interested, shoot me a text. So 503-893-4606. I've got plenty of availability next week. And I'm actually only offering half-hour readings these days for a few different reasons. But I'm liking how that's going so far. And study sessions are fun. I've had people reach out for study sessions of all kinds. Some people have wanted me to review their artwork, and they've wanted me to, steer them in a different sort of direction. Symbolically, people have wanted me to just, give them like a reading list or talk about a certain card. We talk tarot. They might have questions about a certain astrological sign or myth or whatever that I've talked about, and they just want to talk. Not a lot of people kind of get this information, so I want to make myself available for those who actually want to have a one-on-one sort of conversation about this stuff, and we can just meet here online. And let me know what you're interested in, and I can get a custom sort of session or lesson going for you. Also, too, I've been a graphic designer for like 20 years, and so I talk about it here and there. And for a long time, I really wanted to keep symbolic studies separate from me doing design work, and I felt like I had to have clients be separate. from what's going on here. But honestly, I don't know why that makes sense anymore. So I'm just like blending everything together. I'm being more mercurial about it. I'm trying to find like a middle way or a new way. So, um, if anyone out there is ever in need of design services, I've done so many things over the years, ranging from I've done commercials and billboards and logos and websites and brochures and illustrations. I've done sigils for people. I've done a lot of different things, family trees, ads, album covers, t-shirts, posters. I've been doing it for a while. So this is like what I do. So I've designed just anything, honestly, most things you can probably imagine. So if you run a business or anything and you guys are ever in need, reach out at symbolicstudies@gmail.com. And if we're a good fit, we're a good fit, and we'll make something together. Also, my girlfriend has a podcast. Super proud of her. Really stoked with where it's at with everything. She's had some like awesome, like in my opinion, top tier guests on, and oftentimes they talk about herbalism, but it's way more than that. I think that it's covering a larger spectrum the more shows she does. So the runes have been a thing, sovereignty, and kind of like spiritual sort of stuff, and kind of like things related to personal growth and personal healing and trauma work and stuff like that. If you're interested, you guys should check it out. There's a link in the description. It's called The Healing Home, and her project overall is called Michelle's Healing Home. So you can find her at Michelle's Healing Home. And guys, that's going to do it. Thank you so much for hanging out. I'm going to check the chat for a quick minute just to see what's going on. But hopefully, you guys got something out of this. And if I'm mistaken with any of my information, or there's something else you want to add or whatever, just leave me a comment. Okay. All right. Cool. Nice. Okay. Awesome. I see people are here. So that's cool. That's a good sign. Uh, thank you, thank you. Nice. So I see some familiar faces. Thank you guys for hanging out. Jenny B, Slick, uh, Daath, Haas, very cool. Nomad, what's going on? PK, nice to see you, dude. Nicholas in the house. Very, very cool. LC King. Yes. Okay. This is perfect. I'm glad I checked. Okay. So next week, what I'm trying to do is I want to go live on Fridays or release a video on Friday. And so today was kind of a special circumstance because we have plans this afternoon slash evening, and I didn't want to not present, so that's why I did it a bit earlier. But generally, I think I want to try and do like afternoons or evenings or something like that on Friday. Either again release the video or do a presentation. I'm really stoked because next week I'm going to be interviewing LC King right there. And so we're going to be talking about Northern polar symbolism. There's few people who I've come across who are like really, really jazzed with this info. And he obviously, well, it may not be obvious to you, but it's obvious to me. He's obviously very into it. And so he just did an interview on Crow where he gets into some material that we're going to be talking about. And he's a brilliant guy. So I am really, really excited to talk to him. And I believe he's going to do a little presentation for us as well. So that's going to be pretty juicy. And I'm kind of just all in on this topic, guys, right now, just because it makes me excited. And I think there's so much going on here that I want to talk to people about all of these different things. So very, very cool. Let me see if there's any new comments here that are worth bringing up. Interesting, John. Love the stream. Anything in the stove regarding the Gnostic symbol of Abraxas? Yeah, Abraxas is completely related to all this stuff that I'm talking about. And so, actually, my understanding is Abraxas translates to something along the lines of I know there's a polar spin axis, Abraxas axis, and so it actually has to do with the world axis. It has to do with spin, which is why Abraxas is oftentimes riding a chariot. Um, I personally, I don't have any plans of talking about Abraxas anytime soon, but I have decoded it on other channels. So the one that comes to mind is on the Juan on Juan podcast. Shout out to Juan, he's awesome. Me, Slick Dissident, and Juan broke down the Chariot card. And the Chariot card has a lot to do with Abraxas symbolism. So if you're interested, check that out. I know I've talked about it on other shows and whatnot, but Abraxas is very, very interesting. But I see a lot of world axis symbolism with Abraxas. But I'm kind of saying that about like everything now. Nice. Cool, guys. All right. I think that's going to do it. Much love and appreciation, honestly, to everyone out there. You guys are great. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you next week.